Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our event today. Thank you for joining us. We're live on the Zoom webinar for those attendees who have signed up for that via our Eventbrite, and we're also live from North Wales Wildlife Trust's Facebook page this evening as well. We are recording this event. It will go up on our YouTube channel afterwards at some point. So if you do miss any of it or know someone that might be interested in watching it back, then it will be available there. So whilst we just wait for a few more attendees to join us and get settled in, let me introduce myself and do some housekeeping bits and pieces before we crack on with the young people and our debate this evening. So I'm Charlotte Keane. I am a Youth Project Officer for North Wales Wildlife Trust's youth-led project, Stand for Nature Wales. Our project is all about empowering young people to lead the way in their communities with solutions to the climate and ecological crises. You can find out more about our project on our website, and there's also an hour-long talk about the project and climate solutions and a bit of a kind of introduction to what we're doing here at Stand for Nature Wales, which us project staff and a couple of young people from our youth forum did a few weeks back, and you can see that on YouTube. You should be able to find the links to our website and that YouTube video. If you're on Facebook, they'll be in the comments, and if you are on the webinar, it should pop up in the chat, those links as well. We've got a couple of our young people from the youth forum helping us out on tech today. So as we do go through this evening, if you've got questions and comments, pop them in the Facebook comments, pop them in the chat on the webinar. They are being collated, and we've got time at the end of both of the debates this evening to have a look at your questions and put them to our panel. So do send stuff in to us. We want to hear from you guys at home. So today's event, let's talk about today's event. It poses a big question. Is wilding in the future of the Welsh landscape? A pretty big subject. Our youth forum are they asked if they could host a series of debates on some hot topics to do with the climate and the ecological emergencies. We are really keen to support them with this idea and give them a platform to talk about these big topics and the freedom to plan, organise and deliver these events themselves, bring in external speakers and external sort of debaters who they know from within their networks. So we've had our first debate already, which was brilliant. You can also find that on our YouTube channel as well. But yeah, so our subject today is wilding and what the future of the Welsh landscape perhaps might look like. It's a pretty big subject, and it is one that's been at the centre of a lot of controversy over recent years. So today our young people are split into two groups, two debate teams, to bring you debates on this subject. After those, we'll be joined by Dr. Craig Shuttleworth from the Red Squirrel Trust, and we'll have a Q&A with all the panelists and Craig. So get your questions and comments into us for that. Before I invite our debaters on screen, I am going to briefly run through some key terms, some info that you might find useful, and provide some context to some of the things we might hear in the debates today. As I'm sure you are aware, there are a lot of different ways to make places wilder. Some of these are the more controversial ideas which have caused many heated discussions amongst different communities. And we're certainly not here to stoke the fire today. We're simply giving these young people a platform to discuss a really important subject. So they have asked me in their planning of this whole event, they've asked me to kind of do some setting the scene and to talk about the different types of wilding that they might refer to during their debates. So passive wilding, effectively abandonment really, involves the total exclusion of human interaction, and so has a huge impact on local communities, and is only ecologically beneficial over vast areas and long timescales. Then we've got trophic wilding. So trophic is to do with the food chain. It's about introducing apex predators at the top of the food chain and restoring ecosystem processes from this. Again, only beneficial really on big geographical scales, and depending on what the apex predator species is, can have negative responses from local communities. There are some exceptions to that. There's some special circumstances, such as pine martens, which perhaps we might hear a little bit more about later on. Active wilding involves actively rebuilding ecosystem processes, often by reintroducing missing species that provide ecological functions. For example, beavers is a good example of that, or introducing functional equivalent species, Welsh black cattle in grassland habitats, for example. Active wilding is a foundation for the NEP estate model. And if you haven't heard of the NEP estate, it's well worth having a look at to kind of understand an active wilding example. Urban wilding is taking really modified, highly modified urban areas and restoring any degree of ecosystem process function within that. It can be done on a really small scale to a much larger scale, and is essentially all about improving and increasing green spaces for nature. Both wildlife and people in these communities where urban wilding happen will benefit from this. So those are the sort of four broad types of wilding that our debaters may well refer to throughout their discussions. Some other key terminology you might hear include these 5 key terms on this slide. So to just run through these before we hand over to the debaters. Landscape connectivity is essentially how connected high quality habitats are by wildlife corridors such as hedgerows, road verges, riverbanks, avenues of trees, and so on. So that habitats are not isolated pockets of wildlife. Things can travel between them as the landscape is connected. Niche, in ecology, this refers to sort of the specific environmental conditions which a species needs to survive and what it fills, how it interacts within an ecosystem. Ecosystem services is our next term on the list there, and these are essentially the benefits, the many and the varied benefits to humans that the natural environment provide us when we have healthy ecosystems. So clean air, food, carbon capture, all good examples of that. Regenerative farming is agriculture with a focus on enhancing ecosystem services, really. So topsoil regeneration, increasing biodiversity, improving water quality, things that also increase our resilience to climate change. And resilience, that word brings us on to our final term there, resilient ecosystems. A resilient ecosystem is able to resist or recover from or adapt to disturbances and disruptions, such as what we're seeing an awful lot at the minute, extreme weather, extreme heat, extreme rain, things like that. And these ecosystems can sustain the ability to provide ecosystem services. So that kind of describes a resilient ecosystem. So after that whistle-stop tour through wilding and some key terminology, as requested by our young people, it's time to welcome our first debate group on screen. So whilst the young people are debating, please send us in your questions and comments so that we can tackle those at the end. So without further ado, I will hand over to the young people to introduce themselves and enjoy the first debate, everybody. Over to you guys.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. So I'm Emily. I'm on the team who's been writing these debates with the youth forum that we're all a part of. And I'll be hosting the first debate. And essentially, our first motion, we will be addressing the term rewilding. In the motion, should rewilding be a conservation strategy in Wales? So today we have two members of our youth forum speaking for this first motion, Matt, who will be opposing the motion, and Megan, who will be supporting the motion. Now we'll hear their opening statements.
Hi, I'm Megan, and I'm part of the Morngwood Youth Forum. I'm from North Wales and I'm currently studying in Bangor University. And as Emily said, I'm supporting this motion. So to start off with, the State of Nature report published in 2019 found that in Wales, of the 6,500 species in the report, 523 are threatened with extinction from the UK, and average species distribution has fallen by 10% since the 1970s. It's clear from reports like this that current conservation practices are not doing enough to support these species from threats such as habitat loss, climate change, and pollution. Rewilding, or more appropriately wilding, should be a conservation strategy implemented in Wales in order to help make these species and habitats that we have left in Wales as resilient as possible to be able to overcome the pressures exerted by human activity.
Yep. And hi, I'm Matt. So originally I'm from Suffolk, but I now live up here in North Wales, in Bangor, and I'm on the opposing team. And so, in my opinion, I think rewilding as a term shouldn't be really used because it's not clearly defined. There's no clear vision for what it is that people want, because there's some extreme people who just want to have big large predators everywhere. You also have other people who aren't as extreme, who want to have more natural gardens and stuff. So I think terms like wilding are more appropriate. And we should more focus on the less controversial forms of sort of increasing biodiversity or nature in the UK.
Okay, thank you so much both. So let's kick off this debate. Megan, I'll start the conversation with you. Can rewilding really be a good thing for Wales?
Yeah, I firmly believe that wilding can be a really positive strategy if it's done in the right way and can accomplish a lot more where current conservation strategies kind of fall short a little bit. So kind of going over the basic positives first, the most obvious benefit that wilding has is what it provides to nature, creating and reconnecting habitats that enable species to bounce back. Wilding is also an essential strategy when it comes to climate change. Habitats like peatland, woodland, grassland, and heathland are all amazingly beneficial habitats for biodiversity, but can also be amazing carbon stores. 6 million hectares of these habitats could take up 47 million tonnes of CO2 every year, which is more than 1/10 of UK greenhouse emissions. Not only this, but key ecosystem services such as flood defence and water filtration, as well as many others, could be improved upon if we start to restore key habitats like woodlands and wetlands. As a conservation strategy, wilding will be essential in helping species cope with climate change, with particular focus on kind of habitat connectivity, which will make it as easy as possible for species to adapt and move further north as the Earth gets hotter. Current conservation strategies in comparison to rewilding are far more restrictive. Things like sites of special scientific interest, for example, are designations applied to an area where there is a species or habitat of interest, and the aim is to preserve it. Protected areas like this are managed in very specific ways, which can be quite suffocating to other species in the area, and it can be quite inconvenient to landowners and other people that interact with the area. These protected areas also tend to act as islands, and they cut species off from other key habitat that they need. Wilding moves away from this restrictive form of conservation and lets nature take care of itself and lets nature lead the way. since the natural environment is not a static thing and can adapt to environmental changes, a conservation strategy that kind of facilitates this is really, really important going into the future.
Yeah, so my retort to that is, first of all, a lot of those points I do agree with. And again, that's got links back to what I was saying beforehand, is that there's a lot of aspects of wilding that aren't too like controversial or too out there. But something that I personally don't personally disagree with, in the UK at least, is the idea of leaving it to nature and just sort of letting things get on with themselves. Because given how sort of like how all the habitats are in like little islands and stuff, and animals can't move around as well. We see it a lot where organisations try out this whole, leave it to nature method, and it often has really bad consequences. So you see in the Netherlands, there's some examples with deer populations being left, but a really good one that's close to home is in the UK. So if you look at Brownsdown Sanctuary, it was ran by an organisation who decided to sort of fence off an area of land and leave a deer there to do their own thing. And the idea is, again, nature will sort itself out. But there was quite a few problems with this. So because the deer weren't being culled or anything like that, they kept breeding. Because they kept breeding, the densities increased. So you had a lot more deer in the same amount of area. And then they were spreading diseases around, and a lot of them were dying from malnutrition, dying from diseases. There was also the issue with poor communication with the local farmers. So they were seeing all these deer dying, and they were seeing that they were diseased, but they had no idea what was going on. So again, I personally would disagree with the leaving it to nature kind of aspect, at least in the context of the UK.
Okay, I kind of see where you're coming from there, but one of the reasons why there's this huge thing of overpopulation is because there is no natural predator for these populations to exist. And the simple answer to this are things like trophic rewilding, which can be really controversial. But it has been seen to be done successfully in places like Yellowstone National Park in the US, and has been suggested in the UK in places like Scotland, with wolves and lynx. Kind of going into a little bit more detail, in Yellowstone, the wolves were released and had a huge impact due to the fact that they're what's called keystone species. And so they can influence many different species and habitats in the ecosystem. As they started controlling the deer population, the vegetation had a chance to grow back, and a lot stronger as well. They also had a massive impact on local biodiversity, allowing birds of prey, small mammals, beavers, and all sorts of other species to return to the area. The increase in vegetation also meant that the structural integrity of the landscape actually changed, which meant that the land was far more robust to things like soil erosion. With regards to the herds themselves, the way the wolves hunt meant that the overall population of deer became stronger and far more robust, because the animals tend to target older and weaker individuals, and this then solves things like spread of disease and the overall reduction in the deer population meant that there was far less malnutrition and things as well. Overall, the impact in Yellowstone has been hugely positive, and I think it could do similar things like this in the UK, where ecosystems are suffering quite a little bit because of deer overpopulation. And if we're looking specifically at Scotland, there is enough space for the wolves to exist, as well as enough food where they might not become, where they're unlikely to become an issue when it comes to people. It will also become economic for sanctuaries to think about strategies like this in the long term, because they wouldn't have to spend vast amounts of money on things like culling, and also on the damage that these deer have on the landscape.
So again, I think what's worth keeping in mind is the context that Yellowstone worked, because Yellowstone did work, 100% it did, but it's in the context of a very large expansive area. So again, some areas in Scotland, they might be able to do it, but there's a lot of issues with deer across the country. And a lot of these areas where people have mentioned about, releasing wolves or lynxes to, at least in my opinion, are a bit too fragmented, and in other people's opinion, it's a bit too fragmented. So it's too much like little islands of habitat with roads and housing and farmland in between them. So the animals can't spread out properly. In which case, say we release some lynx down there or some wolves down there, when their population gets too high, we're going to have to shoot them and cull them, or do something else with them to prevent them from spreading out and roaming across and getting themselves into road traffic accidents, etc. So that's not really passive. Again, that's still managed. And when it comes to the whole economic side of things with with deer management, I think it's worth keeping in mind that deer stalking is actually quite a large industry, and it supports a lot of people. So I got some like numbers here, which are from Scotland, and it's from 2016. So in 2016, on average per year, Scotland spent about £43.1 million a year directly on deer management. So that's repairing damage they've done. That's also, if there was like ill animals that need to be removed, dealing with those ill animals and, shooting them and culling them, etc. So all those costs, it does cost quite a lot. However, directly from deer management activities, so people paying to shoot deer, so doing deer stalking, they made back £12.5 million. Obviously, that's not, nowhere near how much they're spending. But then when you look at the bigger picture and you look at the Scottish economy as a whole, they find that on average, deer management adds in about 140.8 million pounds directly to Scotland's economy. And so these are things from, for example, if someone wants to go up to Scotland and shoot some deer, they need to stay in hotels, they might go to pubs, they spend on other activities. So there's that extra spending, but also deer management directly supports over 2,500 jobs. So again, having those people employed helps Scotland's economy. So when you look at it as a whole, yes, it costs £43.1 million a year on to deal with deer, but when you look at how much they make back, it's £140.8 million a year. So it's quite a big comeback and quite a big return on that.
I see what you're saying, and it kind of to address your first point about the predator management, even the wolves in Yellowstone are managed, they're monitored and they're managed because you have dumped animals that haven't existed there for almost 70 years into an environment. So it's important to study them to see what the impacts are in the environment. But also addressing kind of like overpopulation of predators. Predator prey systems are kind of self-sustaining and they go in cycles. So the prey population does control the predator population to a certain extent if it's low enough. So I don't think there would be such an issue in terms of wolves need to be culled for overpopulation, but then addressing interference with humans, that would be another issue. Kind of going into the economics of it, in Yellowstone, it's incredibly profitable with tourism, and the total economic benefit of the area is $543 million and supports 6,662 jobs. 10 years after the wolves were reintroduced in 1995, a study found that their presence added an estimated $35.5 million from visitors spending in the local economy. So if you were to reintroduce the predator, even if it's solely for kind of like the tourism benefit, if that's the only benefit, it's not a complete loss because you're not losing out from what you would gain from stalking.
Wow, thank you both so much for a fantastic start to this motion. And I think there's definitely some benefits to nature through rewilding. But we at the Wildlife Trust know that it's vital that any wilding methods in conservation are applied sensitively and carefully within our landscape to maximise the benefit to both people, nature and the economy. However, one crucial question that needs addressing is that wilding requires a vast amount of land. So what about the farming community and landowners in rewilding?
So there are quite a few concerns shared by farmers in North Wales, or in Wales as a whole. Obviously, again, not speaking for every individual, but these are some common trends you often see. So farmers are often concerned about both the economic and social aspect, but also the environmental aspect, because there's quite a few species that benefit from grazing land. So anyone living in Wales knows, sheep grazing is a large form of agriculture for the local communities. And there's quite a few species that have now often do well in grazing land, but have recently over the years been declining. So you're looking at things like tree sparrows, which have declined by about 94%, grey partridge by 87%, and skylarks by 51%. And these declines are between 1970 and 2007. And what the concern is because of how broad of a term wilding is, and it appears to be like almost different camps within it. So people with very different visions of what wilding should be. They have concerns that these sort of species will get neglected and almost kind of forgotten about, and will then further suffer. On top of this, many farmers are concerned that they're going to be displaced due to wanting to have the land for rewilding purposes or wilding purposes. And in Wales, the agricultural industry is like a big, almost like haven of the Welsh language, as it's one of the few big industries where it's predominantly Welsh language based. And so if you're going to be getting rid of farming to then replace it with eco-tourism, you're kind of replacing a Welsh language industry with a English speaking industry, which obviously can rub some people the wrong way. On top of this, some people are also concerned that there are already problems with tourists coming to Wales and disturbing the wildlife, destroying sites of natural beauty by littering. There's also rates of pollution and noise pollution, and so they're a bit concerned that this might also be exacerbated by having another additional tourist industry, when in some of their views there's no need to have this industry in the first place.
Kind of for like addressing what you said about farming, I think a lot of people misunderstand rewilding, and a lot of what is discussed is this kind of land abandonment thing, which we've discussed already. In many instances, humans can't be removed from the landscape because we are an integral part of it. There are species that have evolved alongside us over hundreds of years and have gotten used to the way that we farm and the way that we interact with the landscape. So completely removing humans from the landscape would mean that we weren't doing our job properly as conservationists, because there are species and habitats that depend on the way we interact with the land. Kind of like a great example of this is the yellowhammer, which is almost non-existent on Anglesey at the minute, except for a few small patches, and that is because we've moved away from kind of crop-based farming to a far more profitable way of farming, which is livestock on that land. So the point I'm trying to make is that that humans are integral to the land, and wilding kind of has to accept that. You can't displace farmers completely because they are part of it. Therefore, maintaining nature-friendly methods of farming is going to be essential. You'd also talked a lot about like the Welsh culture and the Welsh identity, and I think wilding can supplement that in reintroducing native species to the land, which are bred and have evolved to live in that landscape, so they can only do good by being there.
Thank you so much, both. That was some seriously valid concerns from both sides. And landowners essentially need to be at the heart of any rewilding attempt. And for some examples, just rewilding the verges of farmers' land, it can help regenerate their topsoil and sequester carbon. And it technically has the label of wilding, but is widely accepted by many farmers to be really good practice. So how else could rewilding benefit Wales?
So wilding provides humans specifically with loads of benefits. More practically, we talked a lot about climate mitigation and flood defence, but also it provides us with benefits to our health and well-being. A lot of us have a newfound appreciation for nature since the lockdowns. A lot of us have kind of retreated into that because it's good to reduce stress, it's good to reduce anxiety, and it's great to it benefits your physical health as well. Far more wild spaces in Wales and in the UK are also going to be used as a tool by educators to teach people about nature and the environment, which is really important. And I'm sure as kind of university students, we understand the want to go abroad and experience these wild places. But imagine if rewilding was a primary conservation strategy in the UK and these wild spaces were on our doorstep. But these spaces don't kind of solely have to be in the countryside. There's a lot more talk of urban rewilding, which Charlotte mentioned earlier on. And since a high proportion of us live in urban areas, this will be far more sought after in the future. Wild spaces in cities are going to be great for mental and physical health, but also will help mitigate things like heat waves and flooding as well, which is really important.
Yeah, I think I do agree with a lot of them, especially the mental health thing, and also increasing how people make use of spaces in urbanized areas. Is when we're talking about increasing biodiversity, is we want to be very careful what message we're putting out, because you do get some people who take it the other way and be like, oh, let's throw loads of different species out here and those native species to do well here because it'll help us deal with future climate change. Because some people view that introducing a species that's not lived here before, that copes better with things like heat waves, is a good way of increasing biodiversity. So you got quite a few non-native reptiles and amphibians, for example, non-native lizards and frogs and those sort of things. And some people argue that these species should be encouraged to spread, because these species, which are mostly mainland European, cope better during these things like these heat waves and these drought events that we've been getting more often than some of our native species. But it's also worth keeping in mind the fact that by introducing these sort of species unregulated, you do also have the issue of introducing diseases into the environment, and also not knowing what other kind of damage might be caused. Because unfortunately, I've seen with the increased trend in this whole in the wilding movement, that also the increased trend of people wanting to breed animals at home in their back gardens and then send them out into nature. Which, when it's done at home, is quite unethical, because alongside the issues with diseases, you also have the issues with the animals often dying because they're often introduced into areas that aren't especially suitable for them. That's not done properly. So I think when we talk about this, we need to be very clear on the messaging behind it, because it's a trend I'm seeing more and more as the people are supporting these more, in my opinion, irresponsible practices and saying it's part of rewilding.
I completely agree with you. The people that are kind of taking things into their own hands are really quite irresponsible, and that is not what we mean by wilding. However, these people do seem to have their hearts in the right place in wanting to help the environment, but don't realise what damage they're doing to local ecosystems. I think there needs to be far more consequences for people that are taking it into their own hands, because it can be quite catastrophic. But there also needs to be more resources out there for people to kind of educate themselves, but also if they're truly passionate about it, for ways for them to get involved in things like volunteering schemes or giving donations, or even kind of being able to spread the correct message to people. I'm kind of wanting to stress that reintroductions like these aren't real, but real reintroductions are well managed, and are properly licensed by appropriate organisations, and most importantly, there is extensive communication between the different parties that are involved to make sure that they're done properly, and to make sure that they're sustainable into the future.
Fantastic. We absolutely need these protections for our land. As we know, guerrilla rewilding attempts often cause more harm than good. We all hear about beavers turning up and then unfortunately needing culled because there's no ecological monitoring or assessments for their reintroduction to the landscape. One concern the general public often have about rewilding is actually how far into the past landscape are we trying to retrieve with these restorations?
Yeah, so this is I guess, in my opinion, my biggest, I guess, gripe with it is, as I said beforehand and several different times, is there's no clear vision on what kind of UK ecosystem we want to create. Because you've got some people who are more looking towards the future and trying to adjust things to, for the future, but you've got some people who want to go back to more to the past. So when you look at people wanting to go more to the past, some people argue we should class anything that was in the UK 11,500 years ago as native. So this would include species such as Escalapian snakes, which there are two main large populations in the UK, one in North Wales, one in London, but there's also been a new population in South Wales found last year. And these guys, they're officially classed as non-native, but there are fossil records of them in the UK from 10,000 to 11,000 years ago. And so some people are arguing they should be classed as native and they should be encouraged to spread. However, what's worth keeping in mind is 11,500 years ago was the end of the last ice age. And the fact is the UK was only cut off from mainland Europe at about 8,200 years ago, roughly. And that was when the big area of land in the North Sea called Doggerland was submerged. But some of these species that people argue are native because they are found during the last ice age, they haven't got fossils found sooner than this. They have not got fossils found from after this 8,200 year mark. So I would personally argue this should be the furthest back we go, as as this is the point where the UK was cut off from mainland Europe. At the same time, you can also argue it shouldn't even be that far back. So humans have been doing a lot of deforestation for a very, very long time. So woodland clearance started in England at about 5,500 years ago. And then, so you can argue, that's when we start having a large impact on the environment. Maybe we should class species around that point as native. Then you also got to look at the fact that 2,500 years ago, again, in the context of England, so not Wales, but in the context of England, about 50% of English woodland was destroyed. And again, only 2,500 years ago, largely for agriculture. And while obviously these numbers are based on England, I think, you know, a lot of these trends are often seen in Wales and Scotland. And by the Doomsday Book, so that's around 900 years ago, England only had 15% of its original forest. So we've changed the landscape so much in this time, probably have wiped out a lot of species in this time. Maybe we should look at concentrating on the species that survived this almost extinction event, and look at supporting those species that have adapted to this new landscape that we have created.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, but my argument would be is that wilding should then focus on recreating these habitats to then bring native, whatever native kind of means, back. And that should kind of be a primary focus, because if the habitats aren't there, you can't, the species can't actually bounce back. And the whole idea of taking an environment back to a certain point does seem a little bit odd to me, which I agree with you on that point, because how can humans possibly judge which period of time in history is best for the environment? And is it even best for the environment, or is it best for humans? Because the only reason our population has boomed is because we can farm like anything. But you know, to do that, we've had to battle the environment a little bit. The best thing we can do is focus on the wilding portion of rewilding and prioritize things like habitat connectivity, like the Living Landscapes Project, for example, and restore things like woodlands and wetlands, which will then act as refuges for the remaining species and the remaining biodiversity in Wales. And these habitats will also soak up carbon and we need to facilitate making ecosystems in Wales as resilient as possible, so that they can survive into the future, and that should be a priority.
Thank you so much both for that intriguing points. And I think we can all agree that we can't just have Pleistocene level ice age animals roaming around with motorways in the way. The landscape just isn't connected enough. And frankly, it's so degraded. Even if you reintroduce megafauna that existed like that or the equivalent, it wouldn't benefit humans or our indigenous wildlife to today. Now, I'd like to hear two of your conclusions. So take it away, Matt.
Yeah, so my personal conclusion is that, first of all, many of the conservation strategies that are proposed with wilding aren't controversial. A lot of them make a lot of sense, and a lot of them are beneficial to the environment and also to humans. So I think we should instead focus on those sort of strategies rather than getting distracted with these more controversial ideas, such as reintroducing wolves into South England and those sort of like mindsets almost, because that often puts people straight away against rewilding and be like, no, we can't do this. But yeah, as I said, any form of wilding should take into consideration the needs of the local community, including the farmers, the local economies, as well as the environment, obviously, and have set very realistic goals that can be achieved.
My conclusion is that wilding is only one, along with many other conservation strategies that kind of seek to do different things. And I think that wilding does have a place in conservation in Wales. The main thing that it should focus on doing is rejuvenating habitats and supporting species in being able to adapt to this future that we're kind of stumbling into, that has far too many humans, where we're kind of excavating all the resources from the earth. So we need to be able to support the ecosystem going into that future as best we can.
Oh, fantastic. So I'm really delighted to be able to conclude our debate now. And in reality, we at the Wildlife Trust know that we should be using wilding instead of rewilding. Wilding means going forward and adapting to environments to improve biodiversity, using targeted reintroductions which contribute to a resilient future, with habitat connectivity and landscape regeneration at the heart of the projects. So now for our second motion of this debate event, I'll hand over to Lawrence and his debate team. Thank you.
Better if you can hear me. Thank you very much, Emily. I'm Lawrence, and I shall be chairing this second motion. We'll be discussing, should wilding strategies prioritise the needs of people? I'm joining you from just across the border at the Shropshire Wildlife Trust, where I have been volunteering with youth engagement and empowerment projects for several years. I'm going alongside me are Kieran, who will be arguing in favour of this motion, and Pete, who will be arguing against. I'll invite them to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Lawrence. Hi, I'm Kieran. I'm originally from the Wirral, but I'm currently studying an MSc in conservation biology at the University of Kent.
I'm Pete, and I am originally from Surrey, but I've moved up to Bangor to study at the university there for applied terrestrial and marine ecology. And I've worked with a number of organisations over the year, like the UK Wolf Conservation Trust, and with Treborth Gardens. So I'll be arguing against.
Okay, then. Thank you both. So, without further ado, I'll pose the question to you: should wilding projects in Wales prioritise the needs of people?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say that, make it very clear that wilding does not mean the exclusion of humans. This divide between humans and nature is artificial. We rely on this planet's ecosystems just as much as any other species does. And there are many cases of specific human management having incredibly positive impacts for biodiversity on wild spaces. For example, the Knepp estate, now widely known as a primary example of rewilding in the UK, is still technically farmland. There are herbivores, livestock on that land that perform ecological roles, yes, but do still produce meat for human consumption at the end of the day, while happening to have brilliant benefits for biodiversity along the way. It's not a traditional farm in the more intensive sense that we're used to, but it is still nonetheless a farm. And another example of an environment with very specific human management having great benefits for biodiversity is the coppicing of woodlands. What this does is it lets more light down to the woodland floor, allows more woodland invertebrates and wildflowers to flourish while still producing timber. And this has become crucial for the survival of some species in the UK, such as the heath fritillary butterfly in southern Britain, as what this coppicing does essentially is mimics the actions of extinct browsers that would come through, open up certain areas of woodland. And while these species are lost, their ecological process is able to continue through humans and thus allow species that relied on it to continue. And while we definitely need to change our relationship with ecosystems to something more sustainable, humans cannot withdraw from these ecosystems entirely. That it's impossible, and that shouldn't be the goal of any kind of wilding project.
So I would argue that I think that while it is obviously important that that humans are integrated, I do think that the primary focus of wilding projects should be on wild species, and the animals and ecosystems that exist. I think that's because these ecosystems have an intrinsic value of their own, a value to the planet, and a value because of their interconnected nature. And so I think we should step back a moment and just sort of ask ourselves, why are we so focused on wilding in the first place? I think it's because when you look at, for example, the British landscape, we've lost tremendous amounts of our wild spaces. There are a lot of pockets, and I think we're working to expand them and to restore them. But that is something that we've had an impact in doing by turning things into farmland, increasing our city space, and I think I think that we do have a sense of sort of responsibility to, and I think that when we approach wilding, we need to make sure that the reason that we're doing that is that we're doing it for nature's sake, because particularly if you look at like the economic factor of wilding, a lot of the ecosystems that we're restoring, for example, a Minsmere with the reed beds that support bitterns, and I've seen them return. Those reed beds were lost because they weren't economically viable. There are tons, a lot of wild flower meadows, for example, that support butterflies, and fantastic species, have been lost because they've been turned into farmland. For example, in South Wales, there's peat bogs that have, managed to secure funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund to restore 256 hectares of previously afforested peat bogs, and those, might not be great to tour, might not have a great economic benefit, but they provide great environment for nightjars, for skylarks, for dark green fritillary and small pearl bordered fritillary butterflies, and waterfowl as well. So I do think that these ecosystems have an intrinsic moral value, and that we should be doing it for them.
Okay, thank you both for those very, very good opening points. So, although people in modern Wales and much of the world live in a way that seems very disconnected from nature, we are still dependent very much on nature, and it has a value in that sense. But as well as this instrumental value, we must also remember that natural systems, biodiversity and wildlife have an intrinsic value of their own that cannot be given a monetary figure. With this in mind, should human economics be prioritised in the planning of wilding projects in Wales? Should we be thinking like business people?
Well, fortunately, wilding can bring a lot of economic benefits. Firstly, wilding can lead to increased yields for farmers through processes such as better habitats resulting in more pollinators, better pollination of crops, and improved soil health through the regeneration of overused soils in intensive agriculture, and more sustainable practices that can result in healthier soils go hand in hand with wilding. And this isn't just theoretical. There are practical examples of this happening. There was a 6-year study by the RSPB on English farms that found that allowing habitat in field margins to regenerate and generate these habitat corridors all around the fields did not lead to any lost yield over the course of this 6 years. And for certain crop species, in fact, increased the yield. This is because these margins aren't the most profitable areas of the field. And through the processes discussed above, such as pollination and improved soil health, enabling healthier crops. And a similar phenomenon can be seen with marine protected areas. When you establish something, such a marine protected area such as a no-take zone where fishing isn't allowed, it allows fish stocks to regenerate and rejuvenate. And what you then get is a source sink system where these regenerated stocks spill over into the surrounding areas, and actually establishing marine protected areas leads to the increase of fishing catches over time. And therefore these wilder seas become better for all, the environment and the fishermen that rely on them, as long as sustainable take of those fish stocks is kept in mind. Perhaps the most promising economic benefit that wilding can bring is through tourism. One study found that the white-tailed eagles on the Isle of Mull in Scotland brought in almost £5 million per year to the local economy through tourist spend at local businesses, paying to go on eagle watching tours, etc. And this shows that what wilding can do is help reverse the downward trend in rural communities, can help stop the youth leaving rural communities due to lack of opportunities, and it can help revitalize and diversify rural economies, making them more sustainable into the future.
Well, I suppose that well, I think that those are good merits. I think that, you know, introducing sort of business practices and assigning nature with a monetary value can be flawed because it sort of introduces the concept of paying to destroy, of assigning, you know, nature and wild spaces as you know, having a value that you could pay, and you start to see schemes such as carbon offsetting and biodiversity net gain, which have flaws to them, you know, such as they really ignore the value of time and that factor that enters in, as they're not very long term. You know, a lot of these practices, such as, you know, adding bat boxes and you know, bug hotels, you know, adding planting extra trees as an offset, you know, they're not actually long term. They don't really factor in as a true replacement, because these, you know, these mechanisms and systems that you're getting rid of, they're part of a greater whole, and they have much more of a value to them than just, you know, that instant sort of monetary fix. You know, for example, Paul Gamble, the CEO of Carbon Marketplace, Nori, he's, you know, stated that carbon offsetting, like planting trees and forests, are not actually sufficient. You know, as practices, you know, forests take they have 100 years to become effective. You know, you don't start to see carbon retention and sequestration for at least 10 years after the trees have been planted. And that, you know, doesn't take into factors, you know, costs into factors such as the risk of maintaining and securing forests against burning or potentially being cut down later. So I think that, you know, it's important not to focus, you know, so much on appearing eco-friendly without properly considering and regulating the methods that we use to combat emissions and to combat, you know, potentially, you know, this idea that we can just pay for nature, because, you know, ecosystems will be undervalued, and, you know, it's not always possible to properly reinstate them in the way that they were before.
Okay, thank you very much both for those very insightful points. So while economic gains can be made from wilding by its positive effects on the systems that support agriculture, fishing, and indeed tourism, a purely economic attitude to wilding could well lead to crippling short-termism and an undervaluing of natural systems and biodiversity, in part due to a poor conception of the timescale over which these processes operate. Now, we touched there on the climate resilience aspect of wilding, something that is perhaps underappreciated. Should the needs of humans be prioritized in this area?
Well, fortunately, rewilded landscapes that are often promoted for improving climate resilience are great for humans too, not least because climate change will affect us and is already affecting us as a species. It doesn't just impact on endangered biodiversity, but it has a number of other benefits for humans too. For example, beaver wetlands, which are often promoted as carbon sinks and as a method of drought prevention, also reduce flooding in communities downstream. They do this by slowing the flow of water down through the land and moderating the discharge of water from the wetlands, thereby reducing the likelihood of flooding occurring in the more populated or urban areas downstream. And this has been shown several times now in the UK, from Cornwall to the Lake District, wherever beavers have been reintroduced. And this is much more cost effective than hard engineering, such as flood defences to reduce flooding. And along a similar vein, coastal wetlands, such as salt marshes, again hailed as a brilliant carbon sink, which sequester more carbon per square area than tropical rainforests, also help protect coastal communities from climate-related threats such as sea level rise and coastal erosion, therefore having more benefits. Not alongside absorbing carbon we've emitted, they also help protect human communities from the worst of the outcomes of the global warming caused by our emissions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, wilding can have a huge benefit for people, but I don't think that it you know, it can be understated that it has a huge impact on endangered species, because climate, you know, adding in climate resilience, working towards that really helps to protect endangered species. You know, when you look at a lot of endangered species, they're often ones that are quite, you know, impacted by their environment. I think a really good example of this is in sort of the tropical areas of South America, where you see the impact of the chytrid fungus, which is a pathogen that has detrimental effects on amphibians. And it takes massive advantage from the increased dryness and increased temperatures that are caused by climate change. So I think that, you know, if we can help reverse that somehow through wilding practices, you know, I think that would be fantastic. But I think you can also see it closer to home in Wales. You know, for example, at the Great Orme, we've got 6 Contoniaster cambricus plant species left. You know, so there's only 6 of them left in the wild, and you know, they're in a very precarious spot, you know, on the coast. And if, you know, the increased storms that we're seeing due to climate change, you know, that poses an ever increasing threat to critically endangered species. You know, touching on beavers, for example, you know, that Kieran mentioned, you know, they create habitats for water voles, which, you know, benefit from that wetland habitat. You know, so I do think that wilding can, you know, really significantly help the impact on endangered species, you know, to help shield them and to slow the rate at which it impacts them, so that the species can have time to adapt and find support in that.
Okay, thank you both. So, while wilding projects, such as the reintroduction of beavers, may help mitigate the negative effects of climate change on humans, we must also consider the positive effects that such projects could have on other species, such as Cotoneaster cambricus, that arguably have a right to their existence. So we discussed that the reintroductions aspect of wilding. Now, in addition to such herbivores as beavers, this could, as we've already heard, include introducing former native predatory species such as pine martens or wolverines to Wales to control the species with booming populations that are causing considerable damage that we call invasive, to control their populations. Should human needs be prioritized in this trophic wilding?
Well, yes, the control of invasive species is another oft talked about benefit of rewilding, with intact biodiverse ecosystems being much less susceptible to invasive species. And this is for a couple of reasons, really. Firstly, just with this ecosystem being more biodiverse, there is a greater chance that the niche that this invasive species would otherwise be occupying and being able to multiply in, being occupied by another species already. And secondly, these more intact ecosystems, there's just more chance of something being able to control that invasive species if there are more ecological building blocks, let's say, left in that ecosystem, there's more chances that something will be able to counter it. And the cost of damage done by invasive species, as well as the cost of controlling them, is staggering. Estimates vary, but it's well into the billions of dollars worldwide. And one fairly close home example is deer in the UK. We've got native species like red deer and roe deer, but there are also invasive deer like sika and muntjac that have been introduced. And finding that there are no large native predators in the UK multiply rapidly and out of control and out of the bounds of their ecological niche. And one study found that deer cause between $7 million and $10 million worth of agricultural damage annually in eastern England alone. So the figure for the rest of the UK is presumably much higher. Now, with the introduction of a predator for these deer, all those costs of the agricultural damages, as well as the costs associated with deer culls, deer-proof fencing, etc., could be heavily reduced. And this would enable, on the whole, economic benefit of such a reintroduction being carried out.
Yeah, well, I would say that I think that, you know, reintroducing predators to ecosystems, you know, has a huge benefit in regard to tackling invasives. And I think that it actually, you know, to see how it really benefits the ecosystem as a whole, I think that it is important to actually analyze what makes a good invasive species. You know, they often have very high reproductive rates, you know, very short generational time. They, you know, they're very resilient. They're quite hardy, and you know, they're quite good at competing. So I think that when, you know, taking that in mind and looking at why reintroducing predators are good at managing them and why they're good for the ecosystem as a whole, you know, it's important to recognize that in the UK we don't have a lot of predators. You know, we've removed them, and that's allowed, you know, invasives to take quite a, you know, a strong foothold. And I think that it, you know, probably the best example in the UK, you know, of that is our grey squirrel population, which have, you know, reduced our red squirrels to really, you know, Anglesey, you know, northern Scotland, you know, areas of, you know, these really small pockets that are left. And a lot of that is down to the fact that the greys are able to outcompete them. And, you know, it's the result of an imbalance in our ecosystems. And by reintroducing them, you know, we can create, as was mentioned in the other debate, you know, really a landscape of fear, like what happened in Yellowstone with the wolf reintroductions. You know, because grey squirrels don't have, you know, the same aversion to pine martens, for example, which are the species that you know, have been reintroduced into Wales. And you know, there's been good studies that shown, you know, like in Northern Ireland, that they have lower response rate. And it gives an opportunity for red squirrels who do have an advantage in that to compete. You know, it reintroduces that element of competition and allows our native species who have maybe suffered because of these invasives to gain more of a foothold, and actually restore balance through introducing high levels of competition that our species can take advantage of.
Okay, so thank you both, Kieran and Pete, for a fascinating discussion on a very, very important issue. So to conclude across this whole motion, any ethically sound wilding strategy will need to consider the needs of humans. However, just as we would be concerned about putting a monetary value on human life or human happiness, perhaps we should also be concerned about putting a monetary value on biodiversity and on natural systems. And this brings us to one final point that was alluded to in the first motion. There's a wealth of evidence that exposure to natural environments and wildlife is good for human mental health and well-being. And surely this is a very strong argument for restoring these wild spaces. It's across Wales and indeed across the world. Thank you very much. And I shall now hand you back to Charlotte.
Thank you, Lawrence. That was wonderful. And thank you to all of you young people for hosting those brilliant debates. It's brilliant to be able to take a step back and let you all do what you are really passionate about, which is discuss these really important issues. So we've got time for some questions. If you want to submit any questions in, please do send them our way. For now, whilst we're waiting for some questions to come in, I'd like to introduce our special guest for this evening, Dr. Craig Shuttleworth. So Craig has spent 25 years reintroducing red squirrels and pine martens to North Wales, graduating from Edinburgh in '92 and did a PhD at London University on red squirrels, and slowly made his way towards North Wales, where he's been since 1998 and is currently involved advising on several species restoration projects in England. Welcome, Craig. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite.
What are your thoughts on those debates that you've just heard the young people give us?
I thought it was absolutely fabulous. I really did. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed every moment of it. It was great to hear a wide variety of points. They've covered in huge detail wilding, the landscape implications of it, the socio-economic implications of it. I particularly like the last bit on invasive species because that's where I've spent most of my career with grey squirrel. And I really thought I was impressed with the depth of knowledge and background. I learned a lot, an awful lot. For the audiences who may not know much about me, I've done red squirrel translocations and recently pine marten, but I've also been involved with the group who said in a publication that we should ditch the term rewilding. But that hasn't stopped me from working with people who are rewilding, I don't want to use the fanatics, but rewilding leaders, if you like, who are sold on it. And I think that the way forward has to be through dialogue and debate amongst the conservation community. And if the term rewilding has a use, it definitely has captured the public imagination, and much more than perhaps language like restoration ecology brings, slightly drier. Having said that, some of your panel members also mentioned the fact that it can be slightly controversial because it can be interpreted as being very fixed insofar as almost an ecological imperialism, where we bring in land use change and the local community that's there perhaps has a sense that they're not wanted anymore. And if that is true, then that's regrettable. And I don't think anybody on either side of the debate would like to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, we've got a few questions that are kind of coming in from various places, and I thought it'd be really great if we can kind of put some questions out there, and perhaps if you want to answer them, and some of the debaters might like to switch their cameras on and kind of take their turn to answer these questions as well. That would be great. So I'm just trying to like multitask and look at the questions that have come through. So we've got this one kind of applies to, I think, the first debate really, and something that was talked about in that, to do with, oh, hang on, where's it gone? I'm sorry. Here we are. How is it ethically justifiable to release apex predators into the wild in order to kill animals that for centuries have never experienced being hunted? Accepting the environmental advantages that might occur, as happened in Yellowstone, human culling of excess populations, whilst probably unpleasant, seems morally preferable. That was from someone who was here, and I think they had to leave, but it'd be great if we could answer that question. for that person. Megan, I can see you've turned your camera on. Does that mean you are ready to jump in with an answer? Do you want to go first?
Yes, please. I'm very excited to answer this question. I have the ethics of reintroduction, especially with wolves, is kind of my bread and butter. So with the way I think I've interpreted the question is the ethics to whether it's ethical for the deer rather than the predator. So when it comes to reintroducing an apex predator for kind of prey behavior, it's what we call restoring a landscape of fear. So with Yellowstone, for example, the whole reason why the wolves were able to establish such an ecological change was because they changed the behavior of deer that got so used to living without predators. So it meant that they were returning to the exact same feeding spots over and over again, and they were eating vegetation, churning up the land, and all that. As soon as the wolves were reintroduced, it meant that their behavior completely had to shift in order to survive. So they didn't spend so long at grazing sites, which meant that the vegetation had a chance to get from that sapling stage where they're far more vulnerable to a more established tree where they're much more resilient against things like browsers. The ethics is, I see where you're coming from with the ethics of it, but in terms of the deer in the UK, it seems ethically fine for humans to shoot them, but in terms of that question, not ethically fine for a natural predator to go out and kill the thing that it has evolved and to kill. To put a kind of spin on it, which is something that I'm particularly interested in, is the ethics of reintroducing the apex predator in the first place to somewhere like Scotland. You know, the UK is an island. If it was just Scotland that they were reintroduced, it means that Scotland would then become the island that the apex predator would only allowed to roam in. How many generations of wolves would you then get before the land became so restrictive that you'd get things like inbreeding, and the kind of population would become inviable in that sense? So that's the kind of angle I really like in this debate, but I appreciate the kind of where you're coming from in terms of the ethics with the deer as well.
I think we could have a whole evening with Megan on this topic, couldn't we? Craig, what are your thoughts on this question? Because it's obviously with your work reintroducing pine martens, have you had any sort of backlash about ethics releasing predators and putting squirrels at risk?
No. The pine marten translocation was done on land that was farmed. It is farmed with sheep farming going on, and the owners are quite happy for it. Just to answer the specific question about that's been asked, I guess the thing is perhaps it's too simplistic to assume that deer would always be, the death of deer would always be the result of a rifle shot if it was human mediated mortality. What about road traffic deaths? If deer are uncontrolled, their numbers increase, and then there are inevitably collisions with vehicles, which from a deer's perspective is not great. It's particularly unpleasant if the animal's not killed. So I think it's oversimplistic to say that our presence and our management of deer would always be clinical and humane, and somehow being chased by a predator or ambushed by a predator wouldn't be. So I have to say, I would fully support the translocation of, say, for example, lynx into the UK. I think there's good evidence that there are places where populations could persist with genetic resilience, maintaining genetic diversity. I think they could fulfill a function. I'm not so sure that we'll ever see wolves released. Certainly not in the medium term. So that debate really is very premature. With the pine marten, of course, pine martens are predating on all sorts of things. they're generalist. So the pine martens we've released have been eating pigeons, they've been eating small mammals, they've eaten some grey squirrel, they've eaten birds. They're very opportunistic. I don't think it's the same as having an animal like a wolf chasing deer around. It's a very different scenario.
Thank you. So we've got Lawrence. Do you want to come in with an answer, and then we'll come to Pete, and we'll then move on to another question. Lawrence.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. Yes, I thoroughly agree with everything that both Megan and Craig have just said. I think that, again, from the point of view of the specific question about the ethics of reintroduction of apex predators from the point of view of the prey animal, well, I suppose that to a certain extent you've got to consider, if it's an animal welfare question, which it appears to be, the capacity that prey animal has, the deer or the grey squirrel, for example, for suffering, and to what extent being hunted by that predator, to what extent being culled by humans, and indeed to what extent other forms of human-mediated death, like road traffic collisions, which of course are more likely if a population is much larger, will be causing suffering to individual animals. And that, I don't know if that is known, I must admit. Also, that must be weighed against whether or not any kind of human-mediated death will create that ecology of fear, which is so beneficial.
Thanks, Lawrence. And Pete.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on something that Craig sort of started mentioning, which I guess sort of ties onto the element of the cars and sort of them being hit by cars, because I think when you're looking at sort of the ethics of, you know, an animal hunting another animal, and whether that's sort of, you know, whether you're talking about suffering or morally ethical, you know, deer as a species, you know, they're very flighty anyway. You know, they will spook quite easily, and that's a behavior that's sort of innate to them. You know, they're again, I appreciate that, you know, hunting is slightly different, but they are, you know, it's not as if you've gone from, you know, you're taking an animal that's, you know, severely domesticated, or something that isn't a wild animal, that is foreign to experiencing fear, that you're then reintroducing them to in the first place. You know, they are wild animals, and I do think that is something that happens in the ecosystem. But deer are also, you know, wolves or lynx, for example, if they were hunting deer, you know, most hunts aren't on animals that are super healthy. You know, they predate, you know, sick animals. They will predate elderly animals. You know, and deer don't have a massively extended lifespan. You know, for a lot of elderly deer, you know, their teeth go because they chew cud. You know, that's how they eat. So once their teeth go, they just die anyway. You know, if, you know, lynx or wolves are hunting them, is that necessarily unethical, or is that just reducing suffering, you could argue, you know, because it keeps populations healthier to an extent.
All right, thank you, Pete. It's a whole other debate topic in itself, isn't it, really? I'd like to, we've not got a huge amount of time left, and I'd like to focus in on a question which perhaps is a little bit more related to kind of people watching this at home. Thinking about the urban rewilding that was mentioned in the debates, and that I mentioned at the beginning. How can people help to make their homes, gardens, and local communities wilder? Emily.
Hiya. So this is a fantastic question, and it refers to a lot of the work that the Youth Forum do. So urban areas are like a massive opportunity for increasing wild areas that we've got. So in reality, hedgehogs actually have their safe haven in urban areas. They're declining quicker in rural agricultural areas than urban. And that's because of the amazing things that we're doing with our gardens and rewilding just a small area of our garden. And I use that term quite loosely, but just having anything which is slightly wilder than the lawn that was there before, creating any biodiverse corridor for pollinators. So like making a meadow, increasing the amount of beetles and slugs in your garden feeds those hedgehogs. And in turn, that's going to create a really, really good biodiverse ecosystem that will trickle out into the rural areas. And they'll be more resilient to the things that they have to fight in areas where they haven't got that safe haven.
Thank you. Kieran.
In terms of, what everything Emily said is great in terms of just making things more wild in your garden, planting wildflowers, leaving things like log piles, etc., letting these processes like decay occur naturally there. But on top of that, I'd say what's very important is connectivity. Like, you can be as great for wildlife as you want, you can put in a wildlife pond, etc., but if there isn't any of the habitat around you that amphibians can colonize your pond from, then it's not going to achieve everything it could. So I'd say get out and talk to your neighbours. If there's a bit of land owned by the council outside that's mown by them every 3 weeks over the summer, contact the council, see if you can do something there, and just create these pathways and networks and connectivity through urban areas. So it acts a lot more like an urban nature reserve rather than each and every garden being isolated.
Brilliant answer, thank you. And Megan?
Just very simply ponds, because ponds are amazing and they're just really cool. We made a pond in the first lockdown at home, and within a year now we've got newts, we've got frogs, we've got dragonflies, and it's amazing. It's like bursting with life, and we don't have any other kind of water sources anywhere around us, so the connectivity is really important. And I completely agree with the kind of getting in touch with your neighbours and talking to councils and things like that. But if you provide the habitats in your garden, a lot of them will find a way to come to you. So yeah, just try a pond, a small bucket with some plants from your local garden centre, and you're on your way.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, I completely agree with everything that everyone's just said there. Yeah, do as much as you can. And I think as you can kind of tell from Megan's sort of enthusiasm there, the joy that her pond has brought her, and that kind of links into the well-being that wilding spaces brings as well for people, the benefits for people as well as for wildlife. Great. Okay. Oh, Matt, have you got something you want to add?
Yeah, I just thought of something else. So for a lot of people with animals, as in their own private animals, it might be worth keeping in mind of like how to be environmentally conscious. So for example, if you are an amphibian keeper and say you have species like alpine newts, which are very invasive in the UK, perhaps keeping them indoors will be a better option than keeping them outdoors, because you have the risk of them escaping, which it does happen, unfortunately. And also being sort of more, again, environmentally minded when you're out with your dog. For example, I've got my dog, and I don't let him run around in areas with like ground nesting birds and areas with birds often like lay eggs on beaches and stuff. I don't take him down there during the nesting season or anything like that. So I think it's also other little things that as pet owners people can do to be more environmentally conscious and try to almost do their bit by having their own collection or their own animals interfere less with the environment around them.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, we'll come to Emily, and then I want to ask Craig one last question before we wrap up this evening.
Cool. So I just had a brainwave after what Matt was talking about with how like to environmentally consciously keep animals. And I think one of the largest things about rewilding your garden is perhaps if you have a cat, it can benefit your garden massively, just keeping the cat indoors at night or permanently as an indoor cat, because like most of their predation happens at nighttime. And if you're trying to culture sort of rare things to breed in your garden, they will eat absolutely everything and perhaps even come into contact with toxic plants. So it's always safer for your kitty if you can keep them indoors at night particularly. That's just one thing I'm really passionate about as well.
Thank you, Emily. That's great. Craig, did you have anything you wanted to add to this question? If not, I've got one more question to ask you.
No, I was just going to say, for anyone watching, just be confident, be the change that you want to see. That's what happened with all the projects that we've done. They've been locally led by members of the community. They were started by members of the community. So think big. Yeah,
absolutely. Believe you can make a difference, because you really can. My question to you to just finish off is about your work in North Wales with the red squirrels and with pine martens. Are there any messages that you'd sort of like to kind of put out there on this platform to kind of encourage people to help with those projects, promote those projects, and help with the conservation of those animals?
Yes, I think, again, empower yourself. Try and find out, ask, email. With the red squirrels on Anglesey, the biggest threat that we have is grey squirrel getting back onto the island. So we've spent a lot of time working with Anglesey residents, giving them information so that they have the confidence and skills to understand the threats that are posed to these species. I think a common denominator throughout everything that I've heard today from the really good, impressive speakers is that we are land limited. We're land limited, and the change requires a discussion. Politics, politics can be good things. Local community support, or politics can be finding a consensus, working around, listening to the people who have a different view. So anyone who wants to get involved in our projects, they can contact us. The Pine Marten project that we've got, really anyone can get involved if they've got a wildlife camera. Put a wildlife camera up in a local woodland and see what turns up. You'd be quite surprised. There are probably more pine martens than we ever imagined in locations, because it's a vast area, isn't it, North Wales?
That's wonderful, thank you. And I must say, I've inspired by all of the amazing red squirrel work going on the island. I've recently had a small win with Anglesey Council in getting some red squirrel woodland signs put up where I live, which is a great little success after some sad little road traffic accidents we've had nearby us. So it's really important that we can make a difference and to believe that. Craig, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Our incredible debaters have taken up so much of our time this evening that we've not had a chance to talk too much more to you. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. And a huge well done to all of the debaters this evening. You're just inspirational to have such a brilliant, passionate group of really well-informed young people to put the word out there about the need to care for our wildlife, for our landscapes, and for our planet. Ultimately, it's really a pleasure to host events like this. We do have, I think, definitely one more debate lined up coming up in a few weeks' time. You'll find more info on North Wales Wildlife Trust events, and specifically our project Stand for Nature Wales events, on our events page on North Wales Wildlife Trust website. We've got some of our forum. We're going to be based at Anglesey Sea Zoo for a couple of days over the summer, talking about climate change and solutions to the climate and nature crises. So have a look at those dates online, and if you can come over and see us at Sea Zoo on those dates, that'd be amazing. And yeah, just keep your eyes peeled for other events. Thank you for watching this evening. It will be up on YouTube afterwards, so point people in the direction of it if you think this is something that people need to see. And that's everything. Thank you so much, everybody, this evening. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, debaters. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.